we're just talking off air. Can we mention this just quickly?
Sure.
Christopher Reed, new city councilman in Twin
New
Falls.
appointed city councilman
And
in
I
this.
think you introduced me to him at the state convention.
Yes, I think I did.
Now, this is a nonpartisan seat, but my impression of him was that he's a really super guy.
I think he's
35 years old. He's got a huge future ahead of him.
Yes, I think he does, and I think putting him in and he has a vested interest in Twin Falls City. Number one, he lives here. Number two, his professional career involves much of the Twin Falls City and expand it beyond that, the county and maybe even the Magic Valley. And so I think he's well founded and well educated and a very careful, thoughtful person. So I think he will be. I think we got real lucky on that one.
We've got a telephone caller joining us. Steve Millington is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. Bill Cowley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And caller, you're up next at 8:35.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, not only is there, going to be a vote come up early in the legislative session to enter a petition for a constitutional convention, but all the legal scholars say you can't limit the convention to one item. It would be an open convention. You'd basically be it'd be like revising the Articles of Confederation when our Constitution was designed and put together. And so what it means is everybody says, well, if there's any bad provisions, 3/4 of the states have to ratify it. Once the convention is held, they can make the rules. They can make it just a simple majority of states would have to ratify. So all of these things are thrown on the table. But George Soros' company and the neocon conservatives and the Republican Party are certainly pushing for it. John Kasich and many others, Mark Levin, Glenn Beck. I mean, it's just the endless list of that have been duped into thinking that we're going to balance the budget and leave the rest of the Constitution alone. It's just not going to fly. The other thing is there's a short-term spending bill to fund more of these refugees or illegal aliens are coming into the country across the border, and we're going to provide their every need, every want, and also expand the H-2B visa program, which brings in high-tech workers to replace American workers. That's spending. We need to get hold of Congress people and their senators and kill that.
And hopefully they'll listen. And thank you. I know that one of our two members of the House will at least listen. The other probably will listen. I don't know what the reaction would be. But you know what? Despite what the grief we sometimes give Mr. Simpson, I think on this particular case he'd be on board.
I think he'd be on board.
Now, you just may have a dispute with the view about this convention being just a one-issue convention or being open to more than that.
Well, I have heard the arguments, not perhaps in the same depth that our caller has, but I have heard the arguments that once a constitutional convention is convened, it could be an open free-for-all, that anything or perhaps everything, including the entire Constitution, could be thrown open for debate and revision. I listened to a guy named Mark Levine who was mentioned, and my recollection is that he is a constitutional attorney.
Right.
That's his primary background in the practice of law is constitutional matters, and he is very firm in his opinion that we could have a constitutional convention and limit the scope to a very select few items. Just this is all we're going to talk about. Period. And the risk we run, of course, is if we had a Wild West runaway convention and they changed every rule and every law. At the present time, we can have a constitutional convention. It could be called by either the Congress based on a 2/3 majority of both houses of Congress, or if we have 2/3 of the states, the state legislatures, vote for a constitutional convention, then it has to be enacted. Now, any changes that might be forthcoming require a 3/4 majority in order to be passed. So 34 states can call for a constitutional convention. 38 states must ratify it in order for it to become valid. So they're those safeguards, and I kind of share somewhat the angst of our caller. Maybe it's not such a good idea. Let's leave well enough alone. And at the same time, I look at it and say to myself, "Yeah, wait a minute. There's a few things in this Constitution that we probably should give some careful thought to."
Well, and the other option there is if they do it, if we had the votes in Congress and they said, all right, we're going to have a balanced budget amendment, then there's no need for a convention. They just turn it back over to the states to see if we ratify
That's
it.
right.
So
The best choice would be for the Congress, the 2/3 majority in the Congress, to say, "Here's our amendment to the Constitution. We are going to force a balanced budget."
what say
Period.
you? Right.
And then send it back to the states for ratification.
Sounding like Bill O'Reilly. What say you? We've got more
Yeah.
coming up. I'm not interrupting you yet, so
No,
it's not quite.
no, we're doing good here.
We've got more coming up with Steve Millington, chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. In just a moment, Bill Colley with you as well. On top story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 16 we'll call it at 8:40. Our studio guest, Steve Millington, joins us on Tuesday mornings between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. And, of course, he's popular with telephone callers, too. I should point out our telephone number, 736-0300. Caller, I'll get to you in just a moment. Bill Colley as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Quick reminder, tomorrow morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, one of the medical professionals from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls will be in studio with us. Tripp Family Medicine located on Fillmore Street directly across from the main post office. They have a great slogan, life's too short not to feel good. If you're still not feeling good, I'll tell you right now, they're looking for new patients. They can often see you on the very same day. If you call up in the morning and you've got an issue, they can often see you by that afternoon. So just to let you know, it's family medicine. It's not industrial medicine. We've got more on the way with Steve Millington. Caller, you're up next. It's 8:44. You're on the air.
Yes, I'm calling about the call for a constitutional convention. You can call it whatever you want, but it's basically an Article 5 convention, and there's no way to limit it. And I heard a gentleman, I don't know his name, on Glenn Beck's show a few weeks back, saying, let's be brave, let's take the risk. Why would we want to take the risk? And, with the power leaning towards the Republican Party now in Congress, the Senate, and the President, it would be a great opportunity to push for a balanced budget amendment through Congress and have the states support it, instead of opening the whole Constitution up to destruction, and which it could be the case. They always say, well, it's just going to be for a balanced budget amendment, and that's it. So why don't we go the normal route that has worked well for over 200 years and get that done? Since most of the states have a balanced budget amendment in their Constitution, it seems like this is an opportune time to really push that and go the normal route and not try to do it in a dangerous way, a reckless way, I think, because there is no way to control the convention once it's convened.
Well, and Steve, follow up on that.
I have heard that argument many times, and if you look at the current 27 amendments to the Constitution, I think it's 27, to the Constitution, all of them were initiated.
One of them took about 200 years, by the way, to finally pass.
Yeah, all of them were initiated by the Congress and ratified by the states. And in that manner, Congress can limit the item to a single paragraph or a single sentence and say, we hereby state we're going to have a balanced budget.
And when the 10 blue estates, thank you for the call, when they leave the union, this will be much, much easier.
Oh yeah, that's exactly right. Now that the caller and I have talked personally with 2 or 3 attorneys who were pretty sharp on this, and they all expressed that same school of thought that limiting a state called convention to a single or even 2 item agenda would be huge. It would be a Herculean
Everyone
task.
wants to put in their own cause. We have another caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air with Steve Millington and Bill Colley on Top Story on KLIX. Hello.
Good morning.
All right, we'll try line 2. You're up next. You're on the air. It's caller date 46. Go ahead.
Yeah, when you guys were setting up this justification that you're doing there of having a constitutional convention, you stated that we have a Republican majority now. Well, that same Republican majority is the very same ones that once Donald Trump got the nomination, they absolutely refused to give him the money that he had coming as a nominee. If you think you can open up this Constitution, and these people that are trying to destroy the Constitution and your freedom, and it's not going to do exactly what they've been trying to do for the last 20 years, you're out of your mind.
That's a very valid point. And that goes back to Donald Trump's statement made very often, we have to drain the swamp in Washington, D.C. And these people are part of that process. And it's not going to be an easy thing to get any of them.
These same Republicans, the National Defense Authorization Act passed, and do you know that they removed the religious protection provisions they had promised conservative Christians? So, yeah.
And that National Defense Authorization Act was passed this last week, I think. Yeah.
I think Labrador was one of the objectors, by the way. We should give him credit. We have a caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air. Steve Millington and Bill Colley on KLIX. Go ahead.
Hey, Bill, great show as always. I have a couple points. I'll be quick. During the debates, the question was asked what type of judges Trump and Hillary would appoint. And, they say we want judges that are going to rule according to what the Constitution says. I don't see any difference between having a constitutional convention to try to change something when the Democrats would do the same thing. That document has served this country well. If the politicians would get off their rear ends and do what they're supposed to do, we wouldn't be talking about this constitutional convention. And furthermore, I don't really trust a bunch of elected spineless pinkos to have good judgment when it comes to a constitutional convention.
Well, Steve, I'll add to that. Thank you for the call. Trump says he also supports term limits. Well, look, Congress right now can balance the budget, and the voters can term limit anybody they don't like, but these things don't happen. But the power is already there. You don't have to enshrine it constitutionally.
That's exactly right. And either one of those things so severely restrict the persona of the politicians that they're just not comfortable trying to do it. I mean, who wants to term limit themselves out of a job? Well, very few of us would go for that. And so term limits, it sounds good, and it really makes a lot of sense, but none of those guys are going to vote for it.
You bring that up. We've got a couple of women who served in the state legislature here back in the last decade. One of them now runs an organization that teaches young people about the Constitution. She and her family are up in northern Idaho, and then you've got Janice McGeehan out in the Idaho Falls, Pocatello area. They were great constitutionalists as legislators, but they both vowed that they wouldn't make a career of it. And by term limiting themselves, we lost those voices, which were very important in Boise.
And they were sound, and they were reasonable, and they were careful. And so it's difficult. It's awkward. How do we? I kind of understand why the founders of the Constitution did not put a term limit clause in the original Constitution in 1789. I understand that. Their numbers were few. The people who had the skills, those who were successful business people or well-educated, or the kind of stuff we look at for selecting politicians in today's world, and not that that's the primary criteria. There wasn't very many or very much of that in place 230 years ago. And so they looked at it and they said to themselves, if we term limit this stuff, holy cow, where are we going to find people to serve in these offices? And we have a caller?
Yes.
Well, let's take the caller. I can shut up.
His wife wants him to do it a lot. You're on, you're on the air with Steve Millington and Bill Colley on KLIX. Go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning, Steve. That was pretty funny. I think we get what we deserve when we put in too many lawyers. We think that they're going to go in there and interpret the Constitution the way it was written with the letter of intent upon it to clarify what is going on in that constitutional moment. But it's not what happened. They get in there and they want to alter, they want to play around, they want to move things around, they want to obfuscate, they don't want to do things. This is where we've come into problems. I've had people tell me, well, it's old. It's an old document. It's an old document. Well, I hate to tell you, but I think if you think you're smarter than those people that put it together, I'll give you a challenge on that. Because if you read anything in the Constitution with the letter of intent on how that provision got put together, you'll find out that things today still apply very well. And now, if we had a bunch of people that would just follow the Constitution, I think we'd be a lot better off and stop playing around with the law.
That's excellent. Oftentimes, I'm not a constitutional scholar by any means. But when I get to reading articles and substantive, I have on occasion read only limited parts of the Federalists' papers. And I read those things and I compare that number one, the language is eloquent and beautiful to read and think through. We don't read or think like that much anymore. And then you look at the concepts that they struggled with 230 years ago, and I say to myself, holy smokes, those guys were visionary as they approached the creation of a democratic republic, that something that had not been seen anywhere in the world previously. And so there was no previous uh, uh, framework or example that they could draw from. They just sat quietly and thought and discussed amongst themselves, sometimes with considerable vigor, argumentation, and they put this thing together and made it work. The only thing I wish was that they would have put term limits in there, and that they would have figured out some way for us to balance the cut and pick and budget.
We have a quick note. First of all, we got about 2.5 minutes. So you have probably a party meeting coming up soon. Now that you've cleared elections, right? At
Yes, we
least
do. We have the state Republican Party has meetings twice a year. They have the winter meeting, which is always held the Friday and Saturday prior to the commencement of the legislative session. So the legislative session is going to begin on January 9, I think. And so on Friday and Saturday, the January 6th and 7th, we will have the winter meeting in Boise. This meeting is always held in Boise because the legislative session begins the day after. And so most of the legislators will already be in Boise. And so it's just convenient for us to meet there and do our thing. So we have two things. There's a long list of things we go through. Primary of importance is we have a standing resolutions committee and a standing rules committee. So resolutions that people want the state party to discuss, or changes to the rules of the state party, are submitted for consideration by the two standing committees. And the committees are comprised of, I think, 16 people. A chairman, a vice chairman, and then two individuals from each of the 7 regions in the state. And the uh, items for discussion have already been proposed and mailed out, so everybody that wants them can look at the proposed resolutions. They can also look at the proposed rule changes that are going to be considered, and the rule changes are, let's delete this paragraph and add this paragraph. Now, keep in mind the
that's like
rules.
an argument over the Constitution back in the 1780s.
Yes,
Just to point
exactly
out.
right. The rules are just that. They're the rules. And so they become fixed and very arbitrary, and that's what we have to work with and live with. resolutions, on the other hand, are strong recommendations or strong opinions. And there are, I think, 15 resolutions. Yes, 15 resolutions proposed for this coming meeting. And some of them are very thoughtful and very careful. Some of them are uh, opinions, and they will be debated very carefully and strongly. I know two or three of the people who are on the resolutions committee, and that will be an interesting session. I can guarantee that. And then the rules committee. Here is the list of all of the state rules, and people that want to make changes to those rules in this way. Uh, they will go through and delete this paragraph or add this paragraph. And so we take the context of the individual paragraph we're looking at, the rule, and the change. How is it going to impact the organization and the operation of the state Republican Party? So January 6th and 7th in Boise, Idaho could be real interesting.
And just one last quick question. When's the next county get together?
The next county get together is a week from tomorrow, the 14th day of December. That's right.
And then a little bit of a Christmas cheer probably there too.
Not too much in the Christmas cheer. We do have a couple of, we always have a program available. We will talk somewhat about the state convention and items that are going to be on the agenda. Every county has 4 votes at the winter convention. That's called the State Central Committee. That's 4 people from every county, plus 1 person from each of the 35 legislative districts.
And you'll be here next week on Tuesday. Yep. I won't, but you will be.
I will be here.
Steve Millington joining us in the studio. 9 o'clock news is coming up next. We have another hour of Top Story with Bill Colley still ahead. Hope you can stick around, but first, Fox News.